Namaste and welcome to the latest session on the Festival of Bharat series of contemporary issues. Today's question, we're going to be visiting the concept of tolerance and intolerance, but setting it against the perspective of the post-2014 elections and the new Narendra Modi ji era. So the question that this illustrious panel will be looking at is India genuinely a tolerant country, or is it showing signs of increasing intolerance, as we are told very frequently by multiple sources? Is India becoming more regressive under Prime Minister Modi ji's custodianship? Or, in fact, are we moving forward in leaps and bounds, but perhaps what some people call breaking India forces? Are they becoming even more vociferous as they become perhaps threatened? So, by introduction, I'm sure that everybody here is known to you, but we will start this conversation with François ji, who has just spoken so eloquently in his keynote on tolerance. Could you perhaps share 7 minutes on the subject of tolerance, but particularly with regard to the allegations raised against Narendra Modi ji's custody?
All right, if my microphone is working, yeah, it is working. Yeah, I know Mr. Modi when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. I had an exhibition on the Kashmiri Pandits, and another exhibition on Aurangzeb. You know, Aurangzeb was a very meticulous emperor, and whatever order he passed, they were written down in Parsi, and the emperor seal was, opposed. So most of the orders of Aurangzeb are kept in 2 archives, the Bikaner archive and the Hyderabad archives. They're accessible to everybody. Our historian was able to access, the Bikaner archive. So we got many orders of Aurangzeb, who, as I said, was not only a very meticulous emperor, but lived very old. He lived till 80, which was, for that age, for that time, it was a very ripe old age. So we used this firma and these edicts of Aurangzeb to mount an exhibition. I have a foundation called FACT, Foundation Against Continuing Terrorism. And FACT was started because I saw the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits. I saw the Kashmiri Hindus being chased of their ancestral homes and lands, for no faults except being Hindu. So at that time, I thought I should do something for these Kashmiri Pandits. So when I had some money, I got a prize of journalism. I started a foundation called FACT, Foundation Against Continuing Terrorism. And the first exhibition was on the Kashmiri Pandits, and the second was on Aurangzeb. Now, Aurangzeb is a very touchy subject in India because he's supposed to have been tolerant, whereas actually he was a very intolerant man, and not only towards Hindus but towards his own family. He beheaded his brother Darashuko for apostasy. He imprisoned his father, and it is said that he slowly poisoned his father Shah Jahan, the famous builder of the Taj Mahal. And he imprisoned his son, and he wrote his will. No, he was a good guy in some ways. So he wrote his will by hand. Aurangzeb, he wrote his will by hand, and in his will he said, 2 things I want to tell you. First, I should have never left Shivaji Maharaj escaped from Agra, and second, never trust your sons. So Aurangzeb, before dying, said, you should never trust your sons. So anyway, we showed that exhibition in Delhi, in Habitat Center. People said, oh, why rake the past? It's all past, forget about it. But it went okay. Then we showed it in Chennai, and in Chennai, there's a gentleman called the Nawab of Arcot, whose ancestors were named by Aurangzeb. He has no power, but in the hierarchy of Tamil Nadu, he's third. After the governor, the chief minister, the Nawab of Arcot. So he came to see the exhibition, and in that exhibition, there was a painting on the raising of Somnath Temple. Somnath Temple was raised, at least 7 times. One time by Aurangzeb. We had the order of Aurangzeb next to the painting to show that, it was not an invention. So anyway, this gentleman got very angry, and then the next day, some people, there was a mosque near the exhibition hall. Some people came, they started shouting, in India, shouting slogans. And the police came, that Nabab of Arkot knew Mr. Stalin, who was then the son of the then chief minister, Mr. Karunanidhi. So he called Mr. Stalin, and Mr. Stalin sent one of his best officers, the one who had caught the sandalwood smuggler, Virapan, yeah? So that very high ranking came down and closed the exhibition and took the ladies, there were two old ladies guarding the exhibition, took them to jail. The police took down, they threw some of the paintings, they threw that painting of Somnath on the ground, broke it. So I was in Delhi, I flew down, and I got these ladies released, and I alerted the press, and then, even a Hindu published something, and Mr. Modi happened to read this article about the Aurangzeb exhibition being closed down in Chennai. Oh, it took us 6 months. It took me 6 months to get back the exhibition from the police. 6 months, the police kept that exhibition. Anyway, I got it back, repaired it. Now it's in the Shivaji Maharaj Museum, Pune. So to go back to Mr. Modi, because I'm going away from Mr. Modi, I met him. So he called me in Ahmedabad. I met him, and I found him to be a very, very nice person. Soft-spoken and hard-working. I found that in Gujarat, because I interacted with some ministers in Gujarat then, that Mr. Modi had implemented a rule of working. Most ministers in India, if you go, even today, if you go to their places, it's full of people who come for favors. The Congress created a culture of favoritism. I come to power with your black money, then after that I do favor. You come and I do favor, and in turn you'll do favor to me. So Mr. Modi, his ministers, and some of these ministers, BJP too, they're like that. They put plastic chairs. They don't receive in their, in their fancy chamber. They receive in one public office. They put 3, 4, 5 rows of chairs, and people move up the chairs and come with their problems or their working working problems, and there is one secretary next to the minister. He takes notes. Next one. So it takes 4 or 5 minutes. This is remarkable in India. So I was very impressed by Mr. Modi, and I felt it was after the Gujarat riot though, and I felt that he is a man who makes people work and works himself very hard. In his office, there was no hangers-on, there was, and it was high-tech also. There was a digital screen. I brought a presentation of my museum, he saw everything, I was very impressed. But I never thought he would become prime minister. Because, of course, there was that Gujarat riots, stigma on him, so I didn't think he would become prime minister. So he did become prime minister, and today is the prime minister of all Indians, and he's proved that he wants to be the prime minister of all Indians. I feel, as a defender of Indians and Hindus, I feel he goes overboard, inviting people like Amir Khan, who may be a, good actor, but I said, that he feels that insecure in India, that he may leave India. Every time there is some attack on church, he goes out of his way to convince Christians that, they've always been free to practice their religion in India, and they continue to be free to be practiced. Every time a Dalit, commits suicide, he says it breaks my heart for his mother. So he really shows that he's a prime minister of all Indians. And yet, no, I don't think any prime minister except maybe Mr. Trump has been so much slandered and attacked and vilified, both in the Indian media and Western media.
1 more minute, François.
1 more minute, okay. So, I gave a long talk about, the myth of intolerance in India. So the myth of intolerance of Mr. Modi is also a total myth, because the man is, has been practically a brahmacharya all his life. He's devoted his life to a cause, that the cause of the Hindu spirituality. He became a political leader because he was asked, and as a RSS member, he felt that he should obey. So he became prime minister by accident, and I feel he's a wonderful person, and he should have the support of all Indians, whether they're Hindus or Muslims or Christians. Everybody should unite to make India, to give India the status that India deserves, that of a world superpower, on par with China. We see that China is doing so good, but India, because of so many things, one of them is the creation of intolerance, is not doing as well as China. Okay.
François, thank you very much for that. Wonderful. You mentioned the incident with this Aurangzeb exhibition. I'd not heard of that before. It's quite a shock and an eye-opener for me. I'm reminded that tolerance and intolerance, a gauge for them, is the freedom of speech and
so
the
what
freedom
I'm
of
saying is that
expression.
we showed Aurangzeb as he was, there was no
Indeed.
discussion, but still the intolerance was expressed.
Indeed. Freedom of expression requires access to the channels of communication and the channels with media, for example. In recent years, we've seen those channels perhaps constrained to some degree, so much so that a counter-argument has had difficulty being articulated. On that note, I'd like to turn to Vikasji, who I think has risen to the challenge of finding and creating alternative channels. So would you like to talk about the subject, but with the emphasis being on perhaps freedom of speech under Narendra Modiji's and your experience of encountering obstacles to it?
Okay. So I have been lucky to meet Mr. Modi personally many times before 2014 especially. So I had, even after meeting him and talking to people who have been close to him, we have to understand few things about him. People refer to him like a Gujarati mindset, like a businessman and things like that. But you have to understand that he has been a pracharak. RSS pracharaks are like not get swayed by a lot of emotional things. They have obviously separated from their family, so those things are connection. They are focused on the job. This is how Mr. Modi ji is very focused on his job, and it's very. I mean, because I'm his fan. There are lakhs of fans, his fans. We get very much disturbed by the media narrative created around him, against him, ever since 2002. But we have to understand that that guy is pained by those allegations, but it doesn't sway him, or he doesn't get disturbed by those allegations at all. He's focused on his work. Coming to the narrative which is being created against him, you have to. There are many people who follow him, and he follows them back. And I've heard a lot of stories, and I have personally experienced myself that if I have to communicate few things to him, we just DM him. For example, I remember there was a temple being made in Gujarat on his name. I DM'd him saying that, "Sir, see, this temple is being made and it is causing a lot of media negative things about me." I don't know whether it was because of my tweet or my DM to him, but the next day the temple was demolished. So it is, and many people have given him ideas about his speech. You are going to this particular place. Why don't you speak on this topic? This is a very emotional topic. Many people communicate with him through his website called narendramodi.in and seek for the appointment. When he was CM, and I'm told and I know that when he was CM, anybody who used to ask for his appointment, he used to personally go through all the appointment lists, that whether I should give this man appointment or not. And he used to meet a lot of people I know who had brilliant ideas to share with them. And he was actually taking a lot of ideas. That's why he made that Gujarat model. Gujarat model, he acknowledges, and we should also know that he has acknowledged many places that it is not something which is out of his own idea. It was actually creation of a lot of good ideas around the country, and he adopted it and implemented those ideas. But the problem is that this left narrative is so strong, and I'm very frustrated. Though I have got created a lot of pages because of frustration and anger, and in order to unite Hindu cause, and they have got around 2 crore to 3 crore likes. But I feel that their reach is immense and their branding is immense. And I personally felt that during the Kathua incidents, when it actually started coming out, everybody around me was very much sad by it. Even I was shocked because I didn't know the truth. The truth they portrayed, that obviously we all know, that they said that a Muslim girl was raped and murdered inside a temple. She was kept for 7 days inside a temple. The pujari of the temple called his son to do the dirty work from Meerut and things like that. It was a very horrible story which was portrayed. Many of us smelled a fish. I also remember Shefali ji also raised few points, but we were immediately means labeled as a pro-rapist, and that kind of allegations were made against us. Even BJP was not willing to touch that particular subject because left narrative was so strong. You remember, everybody, the second day the news broke, the second day everybody, most of the heroines were holding placards with the same statement written on it. hundreds and hundreds of editorials were written, especially in the branded newspapers like Washington and Post and New York Times. And people around us, especially outside of India, used to believe that this particular thing actually happened. Even we believe that this might have happened inside a temple done by a pujari to humiliate Muslim population. But after looking into the charge sheet, we found that it is actually a false story. Even now, we were not able to convince most of our own followers that it is a false story. So it is a very frustrating thing that what Narendra Modi is fighting and what Hindu cause is fighting is a very powerful left narrative and a network system which we may not be able to break. At least not like this. We have to unite and we have to understand that we have to support each other. Uh, Gurmehar Kaur, for example, what was her achievement? She spoke against India and then she was invited to lot of news talks. Books were written. She was made a youth icon for what? Why was she made a youth icon? What did she do rather than taking using her father's name, hero of India, saying that nobody killed Pakistani didn't kill the war killed him, and actually playing in the hands of left narrative. This is an actual achievement. She used her father's name, and whole left liberal lobby was promoting her through different channels. She's now a panel she's on every next panel discussion. She's getting awards after awards. We have to work really hard and together. All the intellectuals of right wing have to actually sit together. All the Kamyodhas have to sit together and work out a plan. Otherwise, we should not depend everything on Narendra Modi. If Narendra Modi is someone who has, I think he is the first nationalist in 800 years who has come with such a force. Yeah, Atalji was there, but his government was not in such a majority. And he's a very powerful leader, and we have to make his hand strong by uniting and understanding that not everything should depend upon him, and we should all unite. For example, such initiative you have taken, this is very wonderful, which is very, very wonderful, and such things should happen all around India, and everybody of us should support each other, so, and not get depressed that if some Hindu did something because of Hindu cause, we should not defend him. At the same time, we should not be felt ashamed of what he did. We belong to a culture which is much bigger than small incidents like that, and we should be proud and we should highlight that and learn about it. That's all I have to say.
Vikasji, thank you for that. Thank you very much. It's reminded me of an incident in the Kumbh Mela a few years ago, where I was visiting the Kumbh with my son, and it was that year when we had the unfortunate incident of a bridge collapsing. Mm-hmm. So I'm in Prayag, as we call it, and I got a phone call from the BBC saying, we'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the collapse of this bridge, and should India be allowed to have such events if it can't handle the safety of its attendants. So this was the BBC troubling to call me all the way in India to talk about this issue. And so I mentioned to them that thousands of years ago our ancestors issued an invitation to the whole world saying, come and join us at this particular place so that we can revel and bathe in each other's discoveries. And every time the Kumbh is held, a city magically appears with 24 police stations located and half a dozen hospitals, and then it all disappears. So the day that London can do the same is the day that you can call and want to talk about something which has happened, unfortunate though it may be. But it's part of this rhetoric of the bandwidth being consumed by very, very powerful dialogues. It strikes me that the extreme left and the extreme right are probably children of the same parentage and the same ancestry, equally irrational and equally energetic to fill the bandwidth. The issue we've had in London with freedom of speech, you probably know that Narendra Modi was prevented from visiting many European countries, and his visa was not going to be permitted, etc. And that was an initiative driven by the left on the extreme side of British politics. But now that's transformed, and people have begun to see that there is actually much more than the froth that the airwaves seem to have been generating. And he was feted when he arrived in the British Parliament, and we all noted, very interestingly, that the only person who boycotted the address that our Prime Minister gave was actually the leader of the left-wing opposition party, who was not able to attend that event. But freedom of speech is something that I think is a real good benchmark for tolerance and intolerance. So on the subject of freedom of speech, which I translate into the freedom to risk offending somebody. If you can't take the risk of expressing because you have fear that somebody might take offense, then that's the first sign, I feel, of an intolerance creeping in. Now, Dr. Sofiya, you too have created quite a few ripples out there. And so in terms of freedom of expression and what you have experienced when you've tried to express your thoughts, feelings, hopes, and aspirations, would you like to perhaps have 7 minutes also to share those ideas and thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. So, as Panditji said, that the first sign of intolerance is when freedom of expression is withdrawn. On the contrary, as you can see in our country, it is a freedom of expression which has been propagating this, propaganda of intolerance. So all these people, if they are being given the chance to speak so much against the country, against the prime minister, and with such accusations and in such abusive manners, me, Shefali Vaidya ji, we have all suffered a lot of abuses over social media. So this itself is a sign that there is not really true intolerance. If at all there is an intolerance, it is towards us who are saying that there is no intolerance. So it's a paradox here if you understand what I'm trying to say. So no, there is no intolerance. And one very good example I would just tell you, when you just shut down your TV, you just don't pick up the newspaper, don't go through social media, just normal routine life, when you go out, where is intolerance? I'm a Muslim. Most of my patients, 90% of them are Hindu. My name is Dr. Sofiya. The name itself, I have not faced that. My husband, his name is Iqbal Hussain Thakur. And he is an aerospace engineer, and he goes to all the, in his earlier job, he used to go to all the government organizations. Never even once, he's right here, you can check with him. He never had any problem with security clearance. And this is, you're talking about ISRO, you're talking about GRT, you're talking about all these Indian organizations which are high security. So at ground level, we, as Muslims, we have not faced any intolerance. And you should all ask that question. So just use common sense. Just don't fall for some people taking a placard and writing whatever they feel like, Just don't fall for it. Don't let it play on your mind. You ask questions to yourself. When I'm going shopping, does anybody deny me based on my attire or based on my appearance as whatever religious background I belong to? Or do I deny someone who comes to me? No. We are a country that tolerance is inherent to India. The very philosophy of Sanatan Dharma is based on tolerance. François G has already elaborated so much, I wouldn't want to go over it. But then, tolerance is ingrained in our Indian DNA, irrespective of whichever religion you belong to. Especially it is ingrained in Hindu DNA, And I know this is going to offend a lot of people, but irrespective of whether you're a Muslim, Christian, or whatever, we all have Hindu DNA. And this is what makes India a secular, tolerant, inherently tolerant country. This is what we talk about unity and diversity. This is our ancestral DNA. This we have been carrying with us ever since, So this myth really needs to be busted, and people from all walks of life need to come forward and talk about their experiences. So instead of adding fuel to the fire on social media, or instead of fighting, let's talk about your experiences. And let's propagate more of peace and harmony. And if I may, few things I would like to say about PM Modi. So I was a kid, when the Gujarat riot happened, and I got carried away, and I hated him for a long time, that this man, because of him, so many Muslims died and whatever. then I started observing, I started communicating with people, and then I realized my eyes opened up that there's so much of propaganda by the media, and they are demonizing him. And when I started understanding from Muslims in Gujarat, they have come forward and told the amazing development that has happened in Gujarat. And after that, you see, Gujarat has been very peaceful after that first riots. If a man was truly intolerant and if he was a dictator, let us ask ourselves, would people vote him again and again for two consecutive terms? No, right? So that itself is a big, he does not have to say anything much. His work and the very fact that people brought him back, including the Muslims, is a testimonial that he is a truly tolerant man, and he's done great work in Gujarat, and that's why we brought him back to lead the nation as a whole, and we need to give him a chance. We have given him a chance, and we need to give him a chance further also. And I see tremendous growth happening in the last 4 years, despite all the chaos and all those things, so much being thrown at him repeatedly. No prime minister has received so much of flack like him. It's really sad. For what? For bringing yoga forward? I mean, really? It's things like this, for bringing yoga, for being a proud Hindu, for what he stands for bringing pride in his people, for bringing pride to being an Indian, for talking good about India on international platform. I think we are so used to being felt like we are no good losers, for so many years and years and years, that now suddenly when someone comes and tells us the opposite, we are not able to hajam nahi ho raha, it's becoming indigestion for us. So I think we need to first change our mindset and understand what he is trying to bring in. And I think that's it.
Sofiya ji, thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. This whole notion of freedom of speech, I've been observing your Facebook wall and so on for quite some time. You rejected me as a friend, but I think that's because your limit, your limit had been reached. But I felt it was intolerant, but then I thought, no, she has the freedom of expression to deny me that. But it's reminded me that we listen to many voices, and perhaps we have forgotten how to judge the voices that we're listening to a little bit. In the freedom of allowing everybody to do anything and everything they want, maybe we need to recalibrate it a little. As Abhiji knows, I was part of an event held in the British Parliament, and I was part of the organising team, and it was called Tolerating the Intolerant. And it was an opportunity whereby we wanted to present to the British public and the British Parliament the history of Hindus and their persecution in the past, but also statistics about Hindus who have been persecuted in India itself and also the neighbouring countries. So the event was very exciting and very passionate, and introduced all sorts of dynamic and incendiary people into the space, but Parliament is created for conflicting views to be aired. And it wasn't until a couple of days later that objections were made that, in fact, we had been engaging in hate speech, and that what we had presented was Islamophobic. So a whole industry seemed to spring up out of nowhere and accused us, merely because we were talking about the suffering of the Hindu community, that in fact that itself was an Islamophobic event. And as Abhiji knows, investigations were launched, there were statements made in the House, and all sorts of prominent people commented on it. But that was in England, one of the places, one of the sources of the BBC who were forever policing freedom of speech and freedom of expression in many countries. So just on the subject again of freedom of speech, we have with us Shefali ji, who again has, I feel, pushed a few boundaries and created her own channel to articulate news which perhaps wasn't being able to be expressed in the mainstream. So would you like to share your experiences with reference to the environment underneath the custodianship of Prime Minister Modi?
I think François hit the nail right on the head when he said that India is a country where the minority behaves like majority and the majority behaves like minority. That is the crux. The myth of Hindu intolerance is the greatest fairy tale told to the children of this country for the past 70 years. Because there is no such thing, it's a contradiction in terms, there is no such thing as a Hindu intolerance. Hindus are by nature tolerant, and which is why everybody has been vilifying us, everybody has been vilifying our culture. People are telling us that Rasam is communal, that Bharatnatyam is communal, that Sari is communal. Tomorrow, if Modi ji starts talking about breathing, people will say breathing is communal, and we are going to stop breathing from today. It's come to that. And I'm not joking. I have had a so-called, again, liberal, someone who describes himself as a liberal, he was saying that, oh, I'm feeling so bad that I live in a city. Because Modi ji talks so much about Swachh Bharat, I want to go out and defecate in the open. That's hatred is to this level. And it's not just a hatred against Mr. Modi as a person. To them, Mr. Modi signifies this other India, which they do not belong to, the Bharat, the real India. And that is why all sorts of vilification is thrown at Mr. Modi, because he is the symbol of a battle that they lost. I have said this before and I'll say it again, that the so-called liberal Indian intellectual is neither liberal nor Indian nor an intellectual. And it is that person, and they are everywhere. They're in the media, they're in the academia, they're in the film world, and they are the ones coming and giving us lectures about how not to be intolerant. When they say we, and by we I mean anybody who doesn't agree with their worldview, not necessarily anybody who is a supporter of Mr. Modi, but anybody who disagrees with them, they label you intolerant because it suits their narrative. So they create, okay, this is good dissent, whatever they say is good dissent, and what we say is bad dissent. This is the dichotomy that has been systematically created over the last 2 years, or the last 4 years, particularly since 2014. You see on the ground. In fact, when this whole debate about intolerance and beef and was happening before some election, and it always coincides with some election, if you track it down, every controversy, whether it's award wapsi, intolerance, the caste violence, Bhima Koregaon, whatever, it has always been timed with some state elections or the other. Somebody should actually do an article on that, or maybe it's already been done. So when all this beef narrative was being propagated in the media, I was going to an exhibition in Pune. And the artist there, the calligraphy artist there, was a Muslim guy from Varanasi. And he had actually carved out the entire Gayatri Mantra in Arabic, in Hindi, and in Arabic and Hindi on a plaque. So I actually spoke to him. He was an elderly gentleman. I said, there is so much of noise happening in the media. Are you feeling threatened? And you have actually carved out the Gayatri Mantra. He said, no, of course not. In real life, there is no intolerance. Intolerance, outrage is there on social media mainly because it is an media, because it is an image that they want to create and they want you to fall for it. He has spoken about Kathua. We all know what happened. We all know that words like I am Hindustan is being used by people who have probably never called this country Hindustan in like a million years. They would call it India. They wouldn't even call it Bharat. But why use Hindustan in a placard? It's very clear. The message is very clear. Yes. That they are trying to demonize a whole religion. They are trying to demonize a whole community. They are trying to demonize all of us. And the minute you say something and say, don't vilify me for, okay, whether the crime was committed also is debatable now because of the new truth coming out. But even if there was a crime committed, how am I responsible for a crime committed by a person? If you keep telling me every single time there is an incident of Islamic terror anywhere in the world, that terror has no religion, blame that person but not the doctrine, then how can you blame my whole religion for one crime done by somebody somewhere? Is this not hypocrisy? But why is nobody questioning it? And unfortunately, as he very rightly pointed out, the narrative is so strong and so entrenched that if it were not for social media, voices like mine wouldn't ever reach people. And you would have completely false narratives being peddled, which are still being peddled, but now at least we also have a voice. And that way social media has really helped. Talking about Mr. Modi, if I may say so, if there is one fault that Mr. Modi can be accused of, it's not intolerance, it's extreme tolerance. So far, let's talk about data. the underage man who was arrested in Bengal because he wrote something about a religious icon of some religion, he was arrested. Was he was he from a minority? No, he wasn't. The person who was arrested in Bangalore recently for writing something on social media, the founder of Postcard, why was he arrested? Whereas mainstream journalists who have been lying through their teeth on Twitter over and over again, some very, very famous names. There has been a journalist who faked a whole interview, a whole studio recorded interview with Sri Ravi Shankar, and she cut and pasted parts of it, and she asked questions and she passed it off as a live interview. In any other country, she would have lost her job and been blacklisted for life. She's still peddling semen-filled balloon stories. And even when it's proved wrong, she's not taken back her tweet or she's not apologized. And there is nothing happening to these people. And these are the people who day in and day out talk about intolerance and how India has become intolerant post-2014. It's ridiculous. It's a sickening, sickening narrative. Thank you.
Shefali ji, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your passion in making your point. It's a strange situation that India has been on the receiving end of the most intolerant visitors for centuries. And I was looking for examples of intolerance in other nations and civilizations who point to India, and I came across a few interesting ones. Most people here have probably never heard of the Criminal Tribes Act, which was introduced in India. Well, it was an extraordinary act of incredible generosity from the point of view of the people who introduced it. But in passing that law in Parliament, its sponsor said, when we speak of professional criminals, we mean a tribe whose ancestors were criminals from time immemorial, who are themselves destined to be, by the usage of their community, to commit crime, and whose descendants will be offenders against the law until the whole tribe is exterminated. So this was the preamble that was used to pass the Criminal Tribes Act in 1871. By birth, criminal by birth, yes. But it wasn't just the British who did this, and it wasn't all British. In terms of the intolerance at the time, there was a gentleman here called Lord Auckland, and his niece was visiting him, and I came across her letter, and she wrote back saying, I wonder how we are allowed to keep this country. Why don't they cut all our heads off and say nothing about it? So this was an indictment of an impartial visitor on what real intolerance actually is. And I don't think a subject of intolerance can be talked about without a reference to the emergency, because that, if anything, was an act of intolerance, of incredible intolerance, and yet is conveniently bypassed. One thing I'd like to do is to open it up to the panel to explore each other's ideas and perhaps respond to something that their colleagues have said. But before I do that, I think it's universally accepted that a fundamental human right is the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. And yet one continuous thread that I'm coming across now is that the majority community is being deemed to be guilty prior to being proven so. And that seems to be an extremely intolerant position to have as the default position for either the media or for commentators. So on that note, if I can open it up to the panel, François, you wanted to respond and...
Yeah, I'll say something, then I have to leave because I'm flying to Paris tonight.
Okay.
One of the most baffling, phenomena about intolerance that the people who accuse you of being intolerant are not ready to dialogue. I have seen with the French, in France, the government subsidizes people who study India. So that is, these people are supposed to talk about India in a scientific and academic manner. There may be 10 of them, and they have been holding sway about what is thought and what is said about India in France for the last 50 years. Every time there's an election, they write in the paper, they talk on TV, and they talk about caste, they talk about Hindu fundamentalism, they talk about Hindu intolerance. So the image that France has of India is often fashioned by these people. Now, when I am their main competitor, they hate me. They hate my guts. So, I never met them, and I'm maybe a decent guy. They hate my guts. They think I'm a very dangerous man. But whenever I offer to dialogue with them, they refuse. So that is, the people who accuse you of being intolerant are actually very intolerant because they refuse to have, an open dialogue. Let us dialogue together and let the public decide, what they think. But they refuse that. And I have seen the same is true of Islamophobia. Now today the biggest crime in the world is to be an Islamophobe. If you say anything against Islam, even if it is justified, you say, okay, it is true that many of the terrorist acts in the world, have been committed in the name of Islam in the last, 30, 40 years, and today we pay the price. Every time we enter an airport, you have to go through so much security. Every time we go to a mall, So if you say that, you're accused of a worse crime than those who actually commit the crimes, those who actually kill people, innocent people, those who ram people, they ram innocent planes full of innocent people, on towers full of innocent people. They're excused because, Palestine and Chechnya and Kashmir maybe, they're excused. But if you say anything against Islam verbally, you may have a wrong opinion, but you're not killing anybody, you're not, nothing, no harm is happening. Today, it's a worse crime. There is no worse crime today than speaking against Islam. So I want to say, that in talking about intolerance, those who accuse you of being intolerant are the most intolerant people of all. And the most absurd, because if they would think a little bit for a minute, they would say, okay, you speak, you don't do any, you may be wrong, but you're not killing anybody. But these people who kill, they're killing innocent people. How can we defend them? How is it, humanly possible to defend them? Yet this is what's happening.
François G, thank you so much for your participation. And I am aware that you're off to Paris today, so we really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Thank you very much for that. If anybody, please, if you could escort François G.
Thank you.
Bon voyage, even. Thank you. I've been wanting to use that for at least 14 years. Okay. So just continuing the theme, what François G raised there is the question, has India been so generous in the past with its resources and its understanding that there are communities and people who have become so spoiled by receiving that they're accustomed to ask and demand, and we are accustomed to give and relinquish without judgment? So, please.
We have the Parsis in India who have been living in India for hundreds of years. It's a very small minority. Have you ever heard them say that they have been made to feel, lesser of citizens, or complaining of the intolerance of the majority? Ever, even once? There are Jews who have been living in India for centuries. Have they complained of intolerance even once? So how is it that a population which is like 11 to 12% of the country, how is it that is the only sectional population that is complaining of intolerance all the time? It doesn't even make sense number-wise. I want to take up one issue which I heard in the previous panel. I heard a lot about how millennials don't have place for religion in their life, or their problems, they are focused on solving problems about poverty or whatever. I agree, there is a section of millennials who have, by God's grace, have got all the resources and they are totally focused about solving problems and all that. But does that make Paresh Mehta, who was 18 and who was killed for being a Hindu in Karnataka, in Mangalore, does it make him any less of a millennial? Are his problems any lesser? Or do his problems not count at all? 18-year-old lady, a Muslim lady, an 18-year-old girl who's been married at 16 and who has been divorced by her husband on a phone, talak, talak, talak. Is she not a millennial? Are her problems not real enough? So when you're talking about millennials, which millennials are we talking about? The RSS Swayamsevak, whose house there was a guy whose father was killed 20 years ago and who was killed recently, last year. He was killed in a very brutal way. Is he not a millennial? He was looking after his widowed mother, he was looking after his pregnant sister, he was killed in front of them. Does he not have any rights? What are his problems? His problems are not about solving technology or getting internet. His problem is just to save his own life and to make sure that his mother and his sister stay alive. But who are we to judge that this is not a millennial? That is one point I wanted to raise. And I mean, this whole intolerance debate is so fake and so manufactured.
Yes.
And I find it really sad that increasingly there are young people falling for it. There's a 15-year-old boy who won a medal for India. Search his name and search Gurmehar Kaur's name and see how many articles are there about this boy who is a real achiever at the age of 15. And Gurmehar Kaur, whose only claim to fame is selling her father's reputation. See the dichotomy and understand the narrative.
Thank you.
I would like to
Vikas ji,
share.
if you'd like to.
Actually, I was having a DM conversation with a Congressy a Muslim woman, and she confessed that I really like singing Ganesh Vandana and all. So I was, please, but this is not the first kind of person I met. For example, Sophia also said that earlier she had a lot of anger for Mr. Modi. Even I was actually shocked when a lot of news about 2002 started coming up, even though I'm a hardcore Swayamsevak. The real culprit here is media and the left ecosystem. They will not let any Muslim or any Christian feel safe in India under a Hindu majority. And I don't have any answer to it. And I don't know how to solve this problem, but we here agree that Hindus are more or less 99% of the times are very tolerant, but they will, the left liberal media system will not let it to be shown to them, and they will instill fear for their TRPs and for their propaganda. I don't know how to solve that issue. It's a long-term issue. It's a very, very, if you go to any journalist wall, if for example, I look into, I was seeing a lot of articles of Lullen Top, for example. They were based on sports and a lot of issues, technology. I thought, let's see their political inclination also. If they are speaking about technology, what are their political inclination? If I search for their walls, and I was actually seeing anti-Modi, anti-Brahmin stations on their wall. So those media organizations are actually hiring, or the whole journalism cult, or say, whole journalism breed is actually so left liberal. So I don't know, means even if they are talking about technology, even if they are talking about anything else, their mindset is actually anti-India. Most of them. So it's not that it is actually the minorities of India which feel unsafe all the time. It is they who make them feel insecure in India. And they are the main problem.
Thank you for that remark. It's a remark that is increasingly being voiced now, not just here, but also across the world. It's a common phrase that it's the extreme left who are creating the extreme right because they're not allowing the dialogue to be expressed. Well, we have 10 minutes, and before I wrap up, what I'd like to do is to invite the audience to contribute and possibly ask any questions. And again, please, if you could say your name, if you could ask your question and direct it to a member of the panel, please name them. I would ask, please, no statements, no manifestos. Please, short, succinct questions so we can squeeze in as many people as we possibly can. We do have microphones being prepared, or could we have some microphones, please? Thank you.
Before we take questions, I just want to say one last
Please,
thing.
feel free. You have the floor for about 1.5 minutes.
Yeah, so just this last one thing. The intolerance is not felt by Indians. It's not felt by any one of us, in my opinion. It is felt by the media and the anti-India breaking forces. They are the ones who are constantly feeding to us. At ground level, I'm very, very optimistic, and I have interacted with a lot of people from my community and even elsewhere. We are living in absolute peace and harmony otherwise. So intolerance is just a state of mind.
Okay.
Like poverty, not like poverty is a state of mind, but this is it. This is being fed to us only over the media, and please let's not fall for this. There is really no intolerance, and intolerance is not just, it's not like Muslims are trying to say that Hindus are intolerant. I don't think so. I really don't think that's happening. You go and ask any random Muslim, are you feeling intolerant really in the country? And I'm sure they will say, no, absolutely not. They're all living well. They're all doing well in their own respective fields.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So, do we have any questions in the audience? The young gentleman
Maybe dressed like a millennial. I'm not so. First, actually a quick remark. I'm part of a Muslim Mahasena group, about 1,75,000 Muslims, and it's completely deriding everything that is Hindu. So I disagree with you over there.
Okay.
Welcome to be part of it. I engage with a lot of Muslims, tell them small things. Question to perhaps Shefali ji or Vikas Pandey ji. Freeing Hindu temples from the government, killing RTE. None of the Hindu causes have really been taken by this government in 4 years. There is a lot of despondency and anger among core Hindus. How do we at all go on defending Modi ji?
I am not disagreeing with you, and I share many of your concerns. But having said that, I am not despondent either. Because when I look back to how things were under the Congress, and when I look at pictures of Sadhvi Pragya and Colonel Purohit and Asimanand, and I realize that what a sinister conspiracy has been played against the Hindus. I don't have answers for your questions. I cannot tell you when RTE will be implemented or when Hindu temples will be free from temple control. But having said that, because of what the Congress has done to the Hindus, like this systematic narrative of Hindu demonization was actually perpetuated by the Congress, and they use their ecosystem in the media, academia to sort of spread it. So because of that, I stand firmly with Mr. Modi. Stay calm, keep calm, and trust Modi.
Thank you for that.
Means as she said that lot of things which were when Hindus were prosecuted, the idea of being Hindu was prosecuted under Congress regime. They have faltered down. Means now people are feeling proud to be Hindus. I see lot of means Hindu festivals. They have changed the vigor, the way which they are celebrated. Even they are carrying tricolor all the time. So a lot of things have changed, and Hindus are feeling proud to be Hindus. So saying that Modi ji hasn't done. About RT and temple, I might have a separate discussion with you. May have a different point of view. Temples, I agree. They should be free of clutches. At least it should be. It should come under right to information. It should be shown on the board that they have actually the funds coming out of the temples have been used for Hindu cause or not. At least that should be done, and I agree with you on that part. RTE, I'm not very sure. Maybe I have been through a Christian education. A missionary education. I have got a very brief idea about it. Maybe I will sit together and decide. But if you let even poors get into those kind of education, maybe they will be prone to conversion later on. So because I have been 12 years into a missionary school, that is my apprehension. Otherwise, we can have a separate discussion.
Thank you. Yes, the young lady with her hand raised.
The discussion over here is about tolerance, and my question is, it's a very tolerant panel, as I can see, So there have been, to get questions out of the audience is very tough. But I have a question in mind, which is, do we want to continue being tolerant, or do we want to now move to what is actually in Sanatan Dharam, which is about mutual respect? We've never been a tolerant nation. Tolerating, you don't want to tolerate me, and I don't want to tolerate you, because that doesn't have a good connotation. So do we now need to up the ante and make the Hindus realize that you are not about tolerating anybody? We did not tolerate the conversions. We do not want to tolerate the conversions which are happening now, and change the dialogue and move to what we are.
Wonderful.
That's
Is there
a question.
anybody in particular you'd like to
Who
direct
would
that
like to
question
take
to?
it?
Okay.
Actually, you're right. Mutual respect is and should be the proper way to deal with it. So I agree with whatever you said.
So I'm going to project that question to its logical conclusion a little bit further, and this may not be politically correct, but I was having a meeting with the Religious Education Council in the UK, and they're working on how to teach the next generation of children about religion, and everybody wants to talk about the equality of religions and how we have to respect all ideologies. And so I put it to them that that's an irrationality. When you teach children how to think, you teach them to compare. You teach them to look at option A, look at option B, judge them on their merits, and pick a path which is the best path. In that sort of a mind, how do you then tell it two contradictory statements and say what you must do is give both of them equality of understanding and of merit? It's an irrational thing. The human mind can't do that. And in our tradition, we never have done that. Ours has always been a fearless search for the reality, for satya, whatever it is. And we've always had the tradition of fearlessly discarding something that was deemed to be asat. And that's a fundamental part of our perspective. But the tolerance and intolerance aspect, there is another precedent. We have a story in one of our ancient Shastra where a play was being performed and the devas were invited and the rakshasas were invited as well. And the rakshasas, the asuras, they felt unhappy that what was about to be said was going to be detrimental and denigrating to them. And so they decided to assault the stage and attack it. But the deities established the principle of free speech. They took up defensive positions around the stage and said, no matter what happens, this forum must always be protected. It's a forum in which anything can be expressed and then considered and maybe deconstructed, but the forum is sacred. And that's a fundamental part of our tradition. The difficulty we have is how do we reconcile with strength and confidence and say, actually, this is what we know is a wiser world and a wiser path, and we would welcome you to come here, but don't bring things that are relatively irrational without allowing us to scrutinize them. This, I feel, is going to be the challenge of India and Indians throughout the world, wherever we are, the approach and the respect for complete fearless engagement without being concerned about defending territories. So that's something that the governments and the leading lights are going to have to encounter, and perhaps we can contribute to their deliberations in this manner. Yes, is there anybody else who would like a quick question? Gee. And I have to say, the other young gentleman there, not wanting to discriminate against anybody.
Hello, sir. My name is Ayushman Kalita. So my question is to both Shefali ma'am and Vikas sir. So when will the distortion of history be corrected? Sir, and second, sir, whenever, sir, the government has tried to take a core turn, it has always backtracked, sir, due to the opposition by the media houses and the opposition parties. Ma'am, that has been very disheartening.
For example, which one you are referring to?
Sir?
Which core thing you are referring to?
So whether it be anything, sir. Sir, recently an article came, sir, where it was discussed that the nationalists will try to change history. So, and then I read there, and then it was said that no, we are not trying to change it. We will just try to be unbiased.
No, they are saying they will be unbiased, means they are changing it, but they don't want to publicize it. When NDA 1 came and Murli Manohar Joshi was HRD minister, actually a lot of things were being changed. But it was also being leaked to the media also. That was causing a lot of problem and friction. Now things are being changed, but they are not coming out in media as such. So things are happening, but we don't know. But if there is no news, then it is good news. So something is happening, but it's best that it doesn't come out.
So one more thing, sir. So the current HRD minister has been a disappointment, sir.
I'm sorry, as moderator, I have to leap in and say thank you for that question, but no thank you. Okay, so we're approaching the end of this session. And if the panelists wish to, I'm going to allow 1 more minute each just to make a closing remark, and then we will close the session. So, Vikasji, if you have anything to summarize with? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, while I have no solution to the problem of left narrative being so strong, but what I have felt that with the social media, as Shefali ji has said, that we have got a lot of our voices. They are hearing to our voices, people hearing to our voices. And for example, if there was no social media, maybe Rahul Gandhi would have been our prime minister, but he's not. That's why we have the power of social media. We should use it often. We should use it for constructive dialogue as much as possible. And in our own midst, between us also, there are a lot of people who are not very logical when they are using the arguments. Sometimes they lose their temper and generalize things based on like religion, all Muslims are bad or things like that. We have to make sure that they understand things. They understand things that a dialogue is necessary. If two people are talking to each other, it doesn't mean that they are only talking to each other. There are thousands of people who are seeing what that dialogue concludes to. That is why it is we as such present in this room and listening to this dialogue as such should become a moderator as well as mentor to those people and make sure that they talk sense.
Thank you, Vikas ji. Shefali ji, in conclusion.
I think I've talked a lot. Not all of it is politically correct. So really, I agree with him. We all need to stay united, and we need to speak up, and we need to be assertive without being overtly offensive or aggressive. Language is very important, which doesn't mean that we take everything that is thrown at us lying around. We have to oppose, we have to make our points, but let us be logical and let's be coherent about it, and keep calm and trust Modi.
Thank you ji.
Yeah, I think I've also said enough. This is just last request to everybody. Let's behave civilized. When we are on social media, I have noticed a lot of things. People behave like they are talking to a computer or to their mobile. They don't understand that the comment that they are sending towards is also another person. A lot of communication, the way it happens as if there's a total disregard. There's a total disrespect. And if at all that's what amounts to intolerance. So let us all keep patience and maintain civilized behavior. And one thing that we should always remember is that India has always been tolerant ever since, and intolerance does not exist. Certainly not in the last 4 years, suddenly, because a country is made up of people. Leaders come and go. Modi ji has been here for the last 4 years. He have 1 more year. We don't know after that what's going to happen. But then people will remain. And if people were tolerant before, they couldn't have been suddenly intolerant in the last 4 years just because the government changed. So please use your rational, use your common sense, use logic, and then conclude for yourself what you think is the right thing, and don't fall for propagandas. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that statement. Wonderful. So in conclusion, this session has been about is India becoming more intolerant and less tolerant under the custodianship of Prime Minister Modi ji. I think we from across the water, we have a little bit of a perspective on this. And one thing we have seen is that India's capital, India's respect throughout the world in the last 4 years has completely transformed. The world leaders are recognizing the Indian civilization as an incredibly valuable asset to the global human race, as well as the ecological aspects of it. And so this, the thoughts that I would have is to perhaps always consider that the person who is pointing the finger of intolerance may not be without an agenda. There are vested interests, and if every single Bharati, every single Indian in any way, shape or form just considers the second thought, who is it who's articulating it? Do they have an agenda? Do I need to accept this as being fact? And I think if everybody starts to do that, the myth of Indian intolerance will actually evaporate very, very fast. The last thing I would have is you have in front of you individuals who have actually made a contribution themselves. They didn't look to become united or anything like that. They looked and thought, well, what can I do about it? And I've seen this throughout the world, that there are people who are actually making that choice and making that difference. And again, if every Indian lives up to the quality and the blessings of their ancestors, we can transform much of what the problems seem to be at this time. They will disappear and evaporate in front of our eyes. So I'd like to thank the audience as well for participating and for turning up on such a hot day here.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.